After studying this module, you shall be able to learn the meaning of conflict and negotiation, understand the difference between functional and dysfunctional conflict, describe the relationship between conflict and performance, know the causes and outcomes of conflict, analyze the types of conflict, and identify the key bargaining strategies. Conflict can be commonly found in everyday lives of all individuals. It is ever present in human interactions and day-to-day activities. Organizations too are not free from conflict. It is so commonplace in organizations that we can say that wherever there is a human interaction, there is conflict. Within the organizations, conflict has an influence on the employee's behavior, performance and satisfaction. This forms one of the important reasons why conflict is a major challenge for the managers when they have to deal with differences among the employees or groups at work. The conflicts pose regular challenges for the managers, thus it becomes important for the managers to understand the concept of conflict and also the ways to handle this conflict effectively. Conflict has been seen as an expression of hostility, aggression, competition and negativity. It mostly arises in situations which involve the irreconcilable differences between the involved parties. Now, definition and its meaning. The term conflict has been defined in many different contexts. In the organizational context, some of the definitions are: conflict can be defined as a disagreement between two or more individuals or groups, with each individual or group trying to gain acceptance of its views or objectives over others. David L. Austin. Louis R. Pondy has given a comprehensive definition of conflict in which he says that the term conflict is used in 4 different ways. First, antecedent conditions of conflictful behavior such as scarcity of resources or policy differences. Second, affective states of individuals involved such as stress, tension, hostility, anxiety, etc. Third, cognitive state of individuals, that is, their perception or awareness of conflict situation. And fourth, conflict behavior ranging from passive resistance to over-aggression. From the above definitions, it is clear that conflict arises out of a clash of interests between parties. These parties can be individuals as well as groups, and each of them tries to stand their ground in order to gain acceptance. If conflict escalates beyond a point, it can take the form of aggression and even violence. Now coming to the next, that is functional and dysfunctional conflict. Conflicts can be functional as well as dysfunctional. This means that conflicts are not always bad and sometimes have positive consequences also. For instance, a healthy conflict can lead to generation of innovative and creative new ideas, whereas an unhealthy conflict can develop feelings of resentment among colleagues. For better clarity, let us quote Professor Kelly, 1970. He says, "Perfect organizational health is not from freedom from conflict. On the contrary, if properly handled, conflicts can lead to more effective and appropriate adjustments." Based on the consequences a conflict has, conflict can be categorized as functional or dysfunctional. Functional conflict. Functional conflict is one which is a healthy disagreement between the involved parties. functional conflicts are productive in terms of generation of novel ideas and insight into a problem. It fosters positive change and creativity. In a functional conflict, there is no resentment between the dissenting party but only a disagreement on particular ideas. Therefore, even though one party's opinions are rejected, they walk away satisfied in terms of the outcomes, which are better and more creative. The second is dysfunctional conflict. Dysfunctional conflict is one in which the involved parties harbor hostile and antagonistic feelings against each other. It is unhealthy in terms of its consequences. Dysfunctional conflict results in a loss of valuable resources like time, money and efforts. To top that, it hampers the appropriate pace of work, which leads to a disruption of output and performance. In extreme cases, it can even escalate to aggression and violence. It is important to identify whether a conflict is functional or dysfunctional in order to take necessary corrective measures. D.L. Nelson and J.C. Quick in 2000 have suggested a set of 4 questions in order to identify if a conflict is functional or dysfunctional. If the majority of the answers to these questions is yes, it indicates that the conflict is dysfunctional. On the other hand, if most of the answers are in negative, the conflict is more likely functional than not. The questions are: first, are the parties to conflict hostile to each other? Second, is the outcome likely to be negative one for the organization? Third, do the potential losses of the parties exceed any potential gains? And fourth, is energy being diverted from goal accomplishment? Coming to conflict and performance. As noted above, conflict can have a major influence on job performance, but the direction of this influence is determined by the consequences of the conflict. As discussed in the above section, functional conflict is healthy and results in generation of creative ideas which has a favorable impact on the performance. Dysfunctional conflict, on the other hand, disrupts the smooth functioning of the organization and hence decreases the job performance. Another aspect worth considering is the amount of conflict involved and its impact on the performance. The figure below depicts an inverted U-shaped curve which shows the relationship between conflict and performance. This means that the performance level are the highest when there is optimum amount of conflict present. In other words, conflict in moderation can prove to be helpful when it comes to job performance. On the other hand, if the conflict is too low or too high, performance drops. This can be explained in terms of the functional and dysfunctional consequences of conflict. If conflict is too less, there is an absence of stimulating ideas which can foster a high job performance. Healthy debates, which can be considered as mild conflicts, can generate these stimulating ideas. This means a moderate amount of conflict is actually good for performance. If the conflict is too much, it undermines the morale of the employees and leads to a wastage of valuable resources. This again has a negative impact on job performance and as a result it drops. Performance can hardly be adequate in high conflict situation. Coming to the next section, that is types of conflict in organizations. There are a number of ways in which a conflict arises and then manifests itself within the organizations. Conflict can be understood on the basis of the level at which it is operating. Some of them are: first, intrapersonal conflict. An intrapersonal conflict is one which arises within the individual. A number of factors can play a role in the development of intrapersonal conflict in an individual. These can include frustration, uncertainty, role conflict, role ambiguity. Frustration and uncertainty related to the job experienced by an individual can result in intrapersonal conflict in organizational settings. Any conflict which has to do with the role an individual plays as part of his or her job, it is considered as a role conflict. Role conflict can manifest itself in many ways. For example, when a role offers contradictory demands which are either impossible or very difficult to fulfill for the individual, it is called intra-role conflict. On the other hand, if an individual is expected to behave in a particular manner as part of a role assigned by the organization, but is unable due to so because these expectations go against his or her personal value system, the person is experiencing what is called as person-role conflict. Role conflicts form an important source of intrapersonal conflicts. Inter-role conflict occurs when there is discrepancy between different roles played by the same individual. This generally happens when the demands of both the roles are contradictory, which are nevertheless expected to be met by the same individual. Such a situation presents the individual with intrapersonal conflict. Role ambiguity is experienced by an individual when there is vagueness in that person's mind regarding what is expected from him or her as part of the role assigned by the organization. This too leads to intrapersonal conflict. The second is interpersonal conflict. A conflict between two or more individuals is called an interpersonal conflict. This can range from a simple disagreement to a full-fledged violent confrontation. Some of the factors which can lead to this type of conflict include personal differences, role incompatibility, information deficiency, environmental stress, etc. Personal differences arise out of personality traits, different mindsets, beliefs and opinions. When these differences escalate into disagreements, conflicts crop up between people. Second is role incompatibility, which also leads to interpersonal conflicts. When organizational roles of two employees regularly make these two people stand in each other's ways, conflicts are bound to happen. Information deficiency often leads to misunderstandings, which also pave way for interpersonal conflicts. Information deficiency can occur due to a breakdown of communication or a failure of clear and unambiguous communication. Once this deficiency of information is removed by supplying the required information, interpersonal conflict can easily be resolved. All these conflicts are likely to get escalated and further worsened as a result of a stressful work environment. Coming to the next section, that is intergroup conflict. Intergroup conflicts involve not just people but groups of people. These groups can be the different teams or units in an organization. Conflicts between various organizational departments can also be considered as intergroup conflicts. Intergroup conflicts generally arise out of factors such as competition for resources, task interdependence, jurisdictional ambiguity, status struggles, etc. Competition for resources can directly lead to conflicts when there are limited resources available and more than one party have a requirement for them. A competition for the control of these resources ensues. This leads to intergroup conflicts. Another factor is task interdependence between groups. This means that If organizational departments or units are dependent on each other for resources, information, etc., for achievement of task-related goals, there can be frequent conflicts between them. Next is jurisdictional ambiguity, means an absence of clarity on factors involving the area of control exercised by the involved parties. When there is an overlap between the jurisdictions of more than one party, conflict can naturally erupt between them. Next is status struggles. Status struggles involve a rivalry between groups in order to obtain the reputable perks by presenting themselves in better light than the other group, which has a direct result of not just competition but also conflict. Now coming to organizational conflict, the conflicts at the organizational level are a culmination of all the lower level conflicts, whereas interpersonal conflict arises between two or more individual employees of the organization. Organizational conflicts have a far-reaching and wide ambit. Organizational conflicts also have wide-reaching consequences and influence the entire workforce of the organization. This means that these conflicts result in wider damage than the previously discussed conflicts in terms of their consequences, wastage of resources, and the negative impact on the morale of the entire workforce. Coming to the next section, it is antecedents of conflicts in organizations. Some degree of conflicts is always inevitable in the organizations. Wherever there is human interaction involved, conflicts might always find a place. But there are certain factors which serve as strong antecedents for conflicts. It is these factors which have to be identified and intercepted in order to prevent escalation of minor conflicts into major ones. These have been discussed below. First is scarcity of resources. Scarcity of resources in the organization is frequently cited as one of the major antecedents of conflict. In the condition of limited resources, different groups in the organization compete against each other to catch hold of these resources, which frequently results in conflicts within the organizations. The second is task interdependence. Whenever there is interdependence between different units of an organization, for task completion, conflicts tend to develop. This means that when one unit's task completion directly or indirectly depends on the other units, conflicts are more likely to happen. This is because one group is dependent on the other for requirements such as time, information, resources, cooperation, etc. When these requirements are not timely fulfilled by the other group, the completion of tasks at hand is unduly stalled, and this breeds resentment, ultimately leading to conflicts. The third is goal incompatibility. Goal incompatibility is another strong antecedent of conflicts in organizations. Goal incompatibility occurs when the goals of the involved parties do not go together or are at odds with one another. In such a situation, the involved parties believe that the achievement of their goals requires a failure of goal achievement of the other party. Fourth, organizational structure. Some organizational structures are more prone to occurrence of conflicts than others. This is especially true for those organizational structures which make way for more overlaps in crossovers in the chain of command, as well as interdependence between different departments for goal achievement. Fifth is personality differences. Personality differences are common amongst the employees of an organization. Organizations are places where people with several different personality makeups come and work together. Not all these people get along well. Based on these individual differences, sometimes there occurs a certain amount of friction between the people involved, which is very likely to give rise to conflicts. Sixth is lack of open communication. An open and unambiguous communication is absolutely imperative for smooth functioning of an organization. Any breakdown in organizational communication can disrupt the flow of information or lead to vagueness in the information delivered. This has many negative outcomes, a possibility of misunderstanding being an important one. In the absence of clear and direct communication, the chances of conflict get increased. This is especially true when there are multiple people or groups involved. For example, if there is communication breach between two employees, it can easily be contained. But if a line of communication passes through all the departments of the organization, it is disrupted, it can have much more serious consequences in terms of conflict. Negotiation. Conflicts arising in organizations need to be settled effectively in order to avoid any negative consequences. Negotiation is one of the most popular solutions to this problem. Negotiation is a process in which two or more conflicting parties try to reach a solution which settles the conflict by offering mutually agreeable terms and outcomes. The negotiation process begins by identifying the problem and planning on a plausible solution. It also requires clearly stating the ground rules to be agreed to all involved parties. Then the parties clarify their demands and also justify them. Then the bargaining begins and a solution is reached which satisfies all the involved parties. Negotiation ends by implementing the agreed upon solution. Coming to bargaining strategies, bargaining is an important strategy in negotiation. In bargaining, both the parties put forward their demands and try to persuade the other to agree to them. Following are the two popular bargaining strategies. First is distributive bargaining. Distributive bargaining is one in which a fixed amount of resources are to be divided between the involved parties. This means that if one gets more, it comes out of the other's share. This makes it a win-lose situation. Second is integrative bargaining. In integrative bargaining, efforts are made to reach such a settlement which offers a win-win situation. That is, neither of the involved parties has to lose on their fair share in favor of the other one. Coming to third-party negotiations, when direct negotiations between the two parties fail due to whatever reasons, a popular strategy is to get a third party involved. This third party can be an individual who is trusted and mediates between the conflicting parties in order to facilitate arrival at a settlement agreeable and satisfying to both. A third party has four basic roles to play in the negotiation process. First is mediator. A mediator is a neutral third party which attempts to facilitate negotiations on the basis of reasoning, persuasion and suggesting alternatives. Second is arbitrator. An arbitrator is a third party which enjoys the authority to dictate a final solution. It can be forced on the conflicting parties by the law. The upside of involving an arbitrator is that the negotiation always settles. The third is conciliator. The role of conciliator can be played by an individual who is trusted by both the parties. Conciliators can involve themselves in fact-finding and persuasion to settle the conflict along with providing a line of communication. And the last is consultant. A consultant is a third-party negotiator which is skilled at conflict management. Instead of offering direct solutions, consultants try to improve relations between the conflicting parties through improving communications, which facilitates them to reach a satisfying solution on their own. Coming to summary, conflicts are common in organizations. They can be functional or dysfunctional on the basis of their consequences. A moderate amount of conflict is actually good for performance. Conflict in organizations can be of many types. These can be intrapersonal, interpersonal, intergroup, or organizational conflict. A number of factors serve as antecedents for conflicts. These include scarcity of resources, task interdependence, goal incompatibility, organizational structure, personality differences, and lack of open communication. When conflicts escalate, it becomes necessary to manage them. Negotiation is an important strategy for conflict management in which the involved parties try to reach a settlement which is agreeable by both. Bargaining is an important negotiation strategy. It can be distributive and integrative bargaining. And lastly, third-party negotiations are also used in conflict management. The third party plays the role of mediator, arbitrator, conciliator, and consultant.